gives me great pleasure in introducing the next speaker, Somirup Dash from Pondicherry. He is a Gen Next RE from India. He is a practicing reproductive medicine consultant and lab surgeon at the Union Territory of Pondicherry. He started Srishti Assisted Fertility and Advanced Laparoscopy Center 3 years back, which was the first IVF center in the Union Territory of Pondicherry. His key areas of interest are in managing poor responders in IVF, laparoscopy in deep infiltrating endometriosis, and embryo transfer techniques. He is going to give us a presentation on delayed ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome.
Thank you. Thank you for those kind words, sir. Good morning. Good morning, my dear colleagues. On this pleasant day, we saw these beautiful videos by Dr. Ranjana, and my presentation will be a little toned down in comparison to hers. Delayed ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. It's an entity which is less touched upon. Very less ink has been spilt on delayed ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and I believe many of the times we would just actually miss a case of delayed hyperstimulation syndrome, and that's why I think it just goes underreported. So what I'm going to present today here, there is a lot of overlap between the conventional early ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome and the delayed ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. And why I chose this topic, why I chose delayed hyperstimulation syndrome is because there is a management dilemma in that. After all the lady has gone through and she's got pregnant, now we have a complication cropping up, which might actually prove fatal. And in my experience, I'll be showing a few slides later on. We really had to terminate a pregnancy because of the severity of the disease, unrelenting complications which couldn't be handled, and that I think is one of the most unfortunate points in my career, where I thought that we should really touch upon this issue. And if you see, PubMed shows approximately 2,000 and odd citations in 2012 regarding OHSS, but very little has been touched on delayed ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome. People just tell that it is a result of pregnancy, and nothing much is there in literature. So most of the things what I will be speaking is that I have taken from whatever is available online and whatever is available in the scientific literature, and of course my experience, where I have dealt in this past 3.5-4 years, dealt with 3 cases of delayed ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, and out of which one unfortunately had to lose her pregnancy. I was happy that it was not fatal, that she didn't lose her life. At least she lost her pregnancy. But again, as it is shown here, it is a potentially fatal complication, and it is very, very difficult to predict. It is very difficult to predict. Early OHSS, you have your measures. We have been discussing yesterday about how OHSS can be prevented. But delayed OHSS, even things being normal, even if you don't stick on to the criteria, sometimes this thing pops up. And then suddenly we don't know what to do. And fortunately, the reported incidence of OHSS, severe OHSS requiring admission, hospital admission, is only 0.5 to 1.5 in certain centers and 5% in other centers. The percentage of delayed OHSS is even smaller. I think one of the reasons is because it is not recognized. It is not recognized, and in most of the cases, the disease follows a self-limiting course, and very rarely progresses on to a fulminant pleural effusion, ascitic pleural effusion and ascites, and reduced renal output and things like that. So I'll be introducing a little bit on the delayed OHSS. on a historical perspective, actually one of the first cases reported, people didn't know that something existed like that, was a case of delayed OHSS, which we now go back and see. This was an extraordinary ovarian reaction to gonadotropins, a fatal case which was reported back in 1958. And also, the second case which was reported was again a case of delayed ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, because as we all know, the use of gonadotropins, the dose of gonadotropins in 1958 and 1978 was, extremely low. And 1958, what we can extrapolate most likely would be a case of delayed OHSS where the patient would have conceived. And that also brings me to one more aspect of this discussion, that finally it is not the dose of gonadotropins also which matters, or finally it is not the number of eggs what you get that matters. Delayed OHSS can happen to anybody who undergoes ovarian stimulation. That is one of the take-home messages which I thought would pass on to this august audience today. And continuing with our introductory note, the late onset OHSS happens between the 12th and the 17th day after HCG. Classically, I have seen it, mostly between the 9th and the 10th day after embryo transfer. We routinely do a day 3 embryo transfer. And around the 9th or the 10th day, the patient usually comes back with the sensation of bloating, breathlessness, and we think that the difficult period is over. And finally, the patient comes back to you with these complaints, bloating sensation, and it might be just mild. And on a scan, you might see big corpus luteal cysts or a lot of free fluid in the abdomen. The result is a result of implantation and HCG being secreted, which leads on to this. This is a very common slide. This is a very very common slide which you have seen, depicting the entire spectrum of complications what can happen, and it also delayed OHSS also would follow probably the same spectrum of complications. Most of the times, as I told you, what has been there in literature has been that it is a self-limiting disease. It is self-limiting, and most of the times it just stops. Provided you tap, you replace fluid, you prevent intravascular dehydration, you prevent thromboembolic complications, the disease just stops on its own. The latest I have seen is a patient continuing up to 10 weeks. We had to almost repeatedly keep on tapping her. For every 3 days she would come back, she would be uncomfortable, she would come back, we would tap her vaginally. And eventually this patient also developed a huge vulval edema. This is again a very interesting complication. I don't know whether it was discussed or not, but this is again a very interesting complication of transvaginal tapping, repeated tapping. What happens is there is a fistulous tract that forms between the peritoneum and the vulva. And the vulva is huge and swollen, like you would see in patients with preeclampsia, and people who and this carried on up to a period of 10 weeks, and the patient after that just got better, and she went on to deliver twin babies. So the idea behind this is tap, replace, and prevent the thromboembolic complications. This is just a slide. I think it just shows the pathophysiology of ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, where there are leaky capillaries and there is accumulation of fluid in the third space. It is basically a compartment kind of a syndrome, and any compartment syndrome, whether it is in orthopedics or whether it is in gynecology, once you relieve the pressure, the hemodynamics change and it results back. Things go back to a normalcy. 1,450 IVF cycles which we have done in our center. We had 40 patients of OHSS, and early OHSS were 37 patients, and late OHSS we had 3 cases, as I had mentioned earlier. In in all these cases, as I told you, one of the patients actually was a gestational surrogate, and she was the one who I'm sorry, she was the one who underwent stimulation, and she was also undergoing embryo transfer for herself. And that was the patient who actually got very serious. And by the 9th day, she came with complaints of abdominal distension, and by the 11th day, she started worsening, complained of breathlessness. We thought that it is because of the abdominal distension. Tapping was done, but the breathlessness didn't improve. The patient kept on coughing, and then finally we realized that she had a massive pleural effusion too, a bilateral pleural effusion. The pleural effusion was again managed by tapping. Finally, what happened was the patient, since she was a surrogate, and she decided that she will not go ahead with the pregnancy, and she didn't want to continue with the pregnancy. And finally, what we did was we give her a dose of methotrexate. We checked the beta HCG on the 9th day. The beta HCG was 560, and we gave her on the 13th day. We gave her a dose of methotrexate, and finally saw it come down, and the symptoms just dramatically improved after that, obviously. The other two patients, one of the patients, as I told you, we carried on till 10 weeks, and after that she just did fine, and she went on to deliver. The third patient had, again, she had triplets. We had transferred 3 embryos, and all the 3 took up. She had triplets, delayed OHSS with the same complaints.
Soumya, sorry, you'll have to keep a check on
that. I'll just hurry up a little bit. And the patient finally, what happened was she had a missed abortion of the first and the second, and it just ended. And she became better after the missed abortion. I'll just have to rush through now. Now, in prediction of OHSS, we have seen PCOS, young patients, low BMI, previous OHSS, genetic predisposition. And in biochemical indices, there are a lot of biochemical indices which I have put up here. And also the ultrasound parameters, which tell us a PCO pattern, high AFC. In all this, there was a combined index which was developed, which is a very complex formula, which has a fairly good positive predictive value. This is for the interest of the. And what I want to highlight here is this, that finally of significance is this AFC and AMH and estradiol on the day of HCG, which correlate well with as a predictive factor for OHSS, and also delayed OHSS. So, in conclusion, prediction: the good predictors are there on your right. PCOS, young age, AFC, E2 level of HCG, ovarian volume, and AMH. Further evaluation is required in the PCO pattern, BMI, and day 3 FSH. And as you see, we always start with primary prevention. These are the various steps which we think will help in preventing delayed OHSS. In conclusion to primary prevention, it has been seen that the incidence of delayed OHSS is less with use of FSH rather than HMG for stimulation. GnRH antagonists, obviously, the classical study done by Kolibianakis and Peter Humaydan have demonstrated, and Paul Devroy have demonstrated that they have almost had a 0% OHSS chance if GnRH antagonists are used, though with a lower birth rate. And IVM also has the same potential. It also carries a lot of promise. And in late prevention, as you see, these are things which you have been seeing yesterday, and will be seeing more of it. The only thing I just wanted to highlight a little bit on the conclusion of secondary prevention was that coasting doesn't actually do any benefit. Cabergoline for late OHSS is of no benefit at all. It only just increases the nausea, vomiting, and it doesn't do much good to patients with late OHSS. And as I told you, as I had mentioned, this is the treatment. I mean, we had just discussed the thing. The termination of pregnancy is a very unfortunate event which we all should try and avoid, but sometimes circumstances might not be in our hands. and this might be the last option which is left. So moving on with delayed OHSS, what was there in the past? Downregulation with GnRH agonist, HCG for the final egg maturation, they had an OHSS rate of approximately 2%. So what is there today? For the first cycle, I believe we should always use a GnRH antagonist cycle. And GnRH agonist triggering should be used, and the embryology, the center should have a robust freezing program. I firmly believe, if there is the slightest doubt, it is better to freeze everything. It is better to freeze all the embryos, and that is what we have done now. And that probably will help us in moving forward towards a OHSS-free IVF world. So, in optimization of stimulation, optimization of embryology services, and optimization of endometrial implantation potential will help us in a OHSS-free IVF world and give more pregnancies. So how we could do that? Optimization of stimulation using a GnRH antagonist and GnRH agonist for a trigger, and optimization of embryology services, freeze all the oocytes and embryos. As we all see, I mean, the only 100% in IVF is 100% freezing of oocytes, which Dr. Kubayama's technique says, and replacement in the receptive endometrium, spontaneous or artificially made endometrial cycle, which would actually help us in doing, giving a better outcome in delayed OHSS. And I thank you all for a patient hearing.
Just comment, not question, yes, about ovarian volume is very, very deceiving. Sometimes you have big ovary or ovary size empty of antral follicles. So I call it desert ovary. I mean, it's empty.
Very right, sir.
The most important is really the antral follicles and not the volume of the ovary. Yeah, yes, thank you.
As you told, it's really very deceptive. It's really, really very deceptive to, see which patient will actually go into delayed OHSS, and it's really, really a deceptive thing. I truly agree with you. Yeah.
Thank you, Soumya.